Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing Brian McDonald's work, The Golden Theme. I'll talk real briefly about the author, go into a brief overview of the work, talk about what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what we'll be reviewing for next time. Brian McDonald is a writer who's written a couple books on writing craft. This is kind of a book on writing craft. I'll get into that in a little bit. He's also directed a short film called Whiteface, which I from what I have read, gathered pretty solid acclaim. It's been played on HBO, as well as he has taught story seminars to Pixar, as well as Industrial Light and Magic. So, The Golden Theme, what the book is it's Brian's look at different stories as they are told and trying to come to an understanding if there is one super theme that kind of connects all stories. Ultimately, he does, and that theme is that we as people are all the same. He then uses that to go into exploration of different uses of stories across religions and cultures, as well as towards the end of the book, talking about the power of universal messages and how that can bring us together or tear us apart. And that's really the book. The book is relatively short. It's only about 100 pages, so it does go by pretty quickly. That to me was one of the good things about it. Was he was written in a very breezy style. I think there's some good entry-level information in there if you haven't read, if you hadn't given much thought to the purpose of story, of why we tell stories. I think the chapters where he covers the different uses of them as far as the ability to relay messages to different people across time and the importance of keeping kind of institutional knowledge within a group of people, I thought was really interesting. There's a couple of practical sections, one where he talks about kind of briefly about removing your ego as a writer from the writing process and using yourself to channel the story as it's supposed to be. And then there's another part of it that is on the importance of empathizing with all your characters, including your villain, which I thought was good to hear. So I think those were the good things about it. The kind of where I had frustrations with it is very much an entry-level text. There's not a lot of depth here as far as any one of the topics, and it goes pretty quickly through them. Sometimes when I've read The Storytelling Animal, which I've reviewed for this channel, and I've reviewed a couple of other books talking about the importance of story. So I accept that this is maybe more of an entry-level text that I was used to. I think when I went in to purchase this book, I was under the impression I was going to get a little bit more practical information about writing as far as using your theme to drive your story. And that's really not what I got there, unfortunately. And sometimes when I read books and I get to a point where I realize the book just maybe isn't for me, if it's something like this was relatively short, I'll just kind of power through it. And then I always ask myself, well, who is this book for? And with this book, I had a couple of frustrations with it. I think I'm willing to accept that this is a good entry-level text for story and the importance of story. To me, like, this would be a book that's good for maybe someone who is in high school or someone who's just thinking about getting involved in writing. This actually pairs relatively well with another book called The Moral Premise, which was written by a man named Stanley D. Williams. They have a lot of the same viewpoints on things, and so if you were teaching a creative writing course as far as the importance of theme, I think these two books would pair well together. If you just read this book, though, my issue with it is, if it is an entry-level book for younger people, there's a part in the book where, and I understand why he did it as a way to kind of show that story shouldn't be used to divide people. And there's a part of the book where he lists a series of racial and homophobic slurs. I think for me, it's hard to recommend the book with that in it if you're recommending it to younger people, especially considering the fact that it could have been kind of avoided. And I thought it was in general really unnecessary. I think he would have probably said that, it's important to understand what the actions of these things were. I don't know if he needed a 2-page list of them, but he did do that. And so that was kind of frustrating. I think there's also some viewpoints that I kind of have a hard time getting behind. There's a couple of points where he makes reference to work that is bubblegum or not really appealing to a deeper purpose or sense of truth. And for me, I think part of story, which would include Hollywood stories through film or novels, a part of that aspect is entertainment. And I think the ability to entertain people and allow them to get away from their problems every once in a while is actually really important. So I think we would maybe disagree on that point as to whether or not those things should exist, because he sounds like he thinks that they really shouldn't be part of works in general, and I had a hard time with that. And also, I may be misinterpreting his overall point to his writing. And I tried to... There's a podcast that came out recently that he was on where he kind of reviewed the book and spoke to an interviewer about it. And I was waiting for him to say, you know, this is who the book was for. It didn't really sound like he had a target audience. It was just like anyone. And so again, because it felt more like an entry-level book to me, I would point this towards someone who is maybe in high school. If you can maybe get around, like I said, it felt unnecessary to me, maybe it was necessary to him. The kind of listing of the slurs I didn't really think really added to too much. But the idea that people are all the same, I think, sounds good. It makes sense from a storytelling perspective if you're trying to tell a universal story, like a Pixar movie or a Disney movie. I think that's true. I think when you get to more nuanced things of the human condition, things like divorce, I recently read a book that I reviewed for the channel where there's two men who are both divorced, and they go down very different paths after their divorce, after their two separate divorces. And I felt that like that, those both stories and both how those stories ended for both of those men felt true to me. So the idea that you're writing one true story for either one of those men, and this would be the only way and definitive and a universal lesson for everybody, felt very false to me. Because there are people who get divorced and then unfortunately kill themselves, and there are people who get divorced and have divorce parties. And those are two reactions to relatively the same thing. And so the idea of having one universal theme, I don't, maybe I'm misinterpreting what his point was, but that felt false to me. Though I do think there are good points as far as the importance of empathy in people and realizing that every person could be you, I think is important. But to me, the idea that there's really just one story and everyone would react kind of a similar way given the same situation, it just didn't ring true to me in my own life. I think he also is kind of disregarding of style. He has kind of a point in the book where he talks about how style should always be secondary to craft and that the style should actually flow naturally from the craft. And I think they're kind of two sides to the same coin. I'm not a published writer, I should say. I'm not a published author, but in reading On Writing by Stephen King, a lot of that is him talking about finding his voice as an author. And I don't think he would say that that was at the sacrifice of his craft at all, but he would probably talk about that being kind of important in growing that with the craft. So those are some of my issues that I had with the book. I couldn't really point to who I think the target audience for it is. The point where he talks about the different slurs, I just felt was kind of useless and really kind of caught me off guard, and I didn't see the value in it. And I think that would probably turn some people off who may use the book as a writing tool because it does seem so from left field and unnecessary. So in closing, that's how I felt about the book. I think if you're interested in the book, definitely check out the podcast because he's clearly an intelligent person. He's clearly thought about this stuff a lot. I just didn't feel like what he talked about on that podcast translated very well to this book. Part of it too, like I said, it is only about 100 pages, and I think this is more of a 101, and I wish it had maybe been a little bit longer and had been a 101 and a 202. So a little bit more of applying these ideas and principles to your own writing, I think would have been much, much more helpful. So that's the book, The Golden Theme. If you have read it and I'm misinterpreting his points, please let me know in the comments section below. If you've read a similar book where it kind of talks about using a moral premise or a theme to drive the creation of a story, I'd also like to hear your comments on that. So that is Brian McDonald's The Golden Theme. Next time I'm going to be reading The Song of Troy. And until next time, please feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel. And until next time, bye.